This video will look at one of the most famous philosophy papers of the 20th century, Thomas Nagel's What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Published in 1974 in the Philosophical Review, the most prestigious academic philosophy journal. Before we examine Nagel's paper, it's important to understand why he wrote it. What is the problem he was addressing and what makes it a problem in the first place? As you watch this video, you can probably hear my voice. You can also probably see colour, not just from the video, but the world around you. You also might be able to smell something. Maybe someone in your house is cooking and the smell of food is wafting around your nostrils. You might feel happy today, maybe a bit down, or maybe even exuberant about something. You might have thoughts going through your mind like, what the hell is this guy even talking about right now? Where is he going with this? What I'm trying to show you is that a whole world of colour, feeling, thought, the entire quality of experience, of having a mind is happening to you right now. But what explains this? This is where the problem begins. How does the mind relate to the body? This is the mind-body problem. When science wants to explain something, it does so through describing something's physical basis. Physicalism is the philosophical view that this approach can explain everything. That all phenomena that exist in the universe are ultimately nothing more than physical processes. In this context, physicalism is a reductive theory. It says that a complex phenomenon can be fully explained by reducing it to its more basic physical parts. For example, consider lightning. Science tells us that lightning is nothing more than the movement of electrons and electrical discharge. So when we observe lightning and its properties, like its bright flash of light and its jagged branching shape, these can all be explained by the behaviour of its basic parts. We've effectively reduced the phenomenon of lightning to its physical basis. Similarly, think about water. The properties of water, its wetness, the temperature it boils at, these all come down to the behaviour of its basic parts. Again, we've effectively reduced the phenomenon of water to its more fundamental parts. The big question that Nagel's paper is about then is, can we do the same thing for our minds? That is, can we reduce the mental, in all of its fullness, its odours, tastes, and complex thoughts to the brain and say that it's just a certain pattern of neurons firing? Before Nagel can start to answer the question, he needs to be precise about what exactly is being meant by the mind and experience. Nagel's word for it is consciousness, though not consciousness in the sense of just being awake rather than asleep. Instead, he means something much more particular. He says, an organism has conscious mental states if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism. Something it is like for the organism. What does this mean? Well, if something is conscious, then there is a feeling, a quality, a something it is likeness to be that thing from the inside. For example, imagine being put into a hot room. You could identify that it was hot. Now take a thermostat. It can also identify that the room is hot. But there's something extra that you have that the thermostat does not. You feel what the hotness feels like. It feels a certain way to be hot. Although the thermostat might indicate that it's hot, it doesn't get the hot experience. It doesn't have the conscious experience of heat, because the thermostat isn't conscious, but you are. Now try to imagine what it would be like to be a rock. You'll find that you can't. It wouldn't be like seeing nothing, or hearing nothing, or smelling nothing. If you close your eyes, there's a way that it's like to see nothing. There's also a way that it's like to breathe in through your nose and smell nothing of significance. There's something it is like to have diminished experiences, but a rock has no experiences at all. So there's nothing it's like to be a rock. A rock isn't conscious. The thing then that you have that a thermostat and a rock don't have is called consciousness. There is something that it's like to be the conscious thing from the inside. So then, what is it like to be a bat? Bats are mammals, so we can assume that bats are conscious, that there is something it is like to be a bat. But bats have a unique way of navigating the world around them. They use echolocation. They basically see by sending out high frequency shrieks and interpreting the echoes in order to map the world around them. Of course, this is a sense that humans don't have. We can see visually, smell, hear, etc., but we can't echolocate. So, what is it like to be a bat? What is it like to use echolocation, to map the world around you using sounds, and to have webbed arms? Can we understand what that is like? Nagel thinks we can't. The experience of what it's like to be a bat is so different that there is no common ground of memory to act as a basis for understanding. To use echolocation wouldn't be like seeing, like observing the textures and colours of objects around us. It's just something completely different. We can try to imagine what it's like to fly around, hang upside down and try to locate objects by shrieking, but this doesn't quite get us there. Nagel says that doing this only tells you what it's like for a human to behave like a bat. But what we want to know, and what Nagel wants to know too, is what it's like for a bat to be a bat. But what's the point of all of this? Nagel says this: whatever may be the status of facts about what it's like to be a human being, or a bat, or a Martian, these appear to be facts that embody a particular point of view. What Nagel is highlighting here is the divide between subjective and objective facts. There are some facts that are subjective, that are tied to a singular point of view, like what the sourness of a lemon feels like. And there are some facts that are objective, that are totally independent of any viewpoint, like the chemical makeup of a lemon. So, with consciousness defined and the difference between subjective and objective facts made apparent, what is Nagel's argument? Nagel's argument is that science, by design, is unable to explain these subjective facts, the facts about experience. And here's the reason why. As we've discussed, science explains things by stepping away from any particular point of view. This means that any explanation provided by science doesn't depend on a point of view to be understood. This is what makes an explanation objective. But consciousness just is what things are like from a specific point of view. This is what subjective facts are by definition. So when science tries to reduce the mind to physical, objective parts, it inevitably abandons the very thing it set out to explain, the subjective character of experience. To illustrate this point, reconsider lightning. Lightning is something that we can know about without science. It's this thing that, when it rains, it comes down from the sky in an aggressive, bright flash of light. That's how it seems to us, how it seems from our particular subjective perspective. At this point, to explain what's really going on here, science gets away from how things seem to you and tells you how they really are, objectively. For example, lightning is electrical discharge, a build-up of electrical charge that suddenly releases, superheating the air and causing the flash and the crack of thunder. When science gives us this description of how things objectively are, it abandons the subjective, it abandons how things seem. The big problem then is that consciousness just is what things are like from a particular point of view. It just is what things seem like. To remove it is to remove the very thing you're trying to explain. Nagel says, every subjective phenomenon is essentially connected with a single point of view, and it seems inevitable that an objective physical theory will abandon that point of view. He then goes on to say, for if the facts of experience, facts about what it's like for the experiencing organism, are accessible from only one point of view, then it's a mystery how the true character of experience could be revealed in the physical operation of that organism. The latter is a domain of objective facts par excellence, the kind that can be observed and understood from many points of view, and by individuals with differing perceptual systems. The point that Nagel is making here is that objective descriptions about the world are accessible by any creature, regardless of their perceptual systems. For example, if you had a bat that could echolocate, but also had as much cognitive prowess as humans do, that is, it had the same level of complex thought as us, and language, etc., then we would be able to give it all of the science that we have. This is because our objective descriptions don't reference any particular sensory quality as a part of what it means. For example, that lightning is a build-up of electrical charge that suddenly discharges says nothing about how lightning seems, e.g. that it's bright and flashy. That's why a physicist who was blind from birth could still understand physics despite being blind. The same logic applies for our humanly intelligent bat. But what the bat couldn't give us, however, is some sense of what it's like to be a bat, to echolocate, to have webbed arms and to fly around. And again, to really drive Nagel's point home, the reason for this is because science reduces some phenomenon to an objective set of facts which could be understood from any point of view, But what we want to capture here is a point of view. It seems inevitable then that we wouldn't be able to capture subjective facts through objective ones. Nagel sums this point up when he says, "Certainly it appears unlikely that we will get closer to the real nature of human experience by leaving behind the particularity of our own human point of view, and striving for a description in terms accessible to beings that could not imagine what it was like to be us. If the subjective character of experience is fully comprehensible only from one point of view, then any shift to greater objectivity, that is, less attachment to a specific viewpoint, does not take us nearer to the real nature of the phenomenon, it takes us further away from it." So consciousness is a subjective point of view, but physical science, by definition, gets away from subjective perspectives and goes toward objective understanding. So in trying to give a scientific account of conscious experience, one only ends up getting farther away from the very thing that one set out to understand. So where does this argument leave us? Does Nagel's argument mean that physicalism, that everything in the universe is made up of physical stuff, is false, and that consciousness is a substance other than the physical? To be honest, Nagel's argument could be used in that way, and it might seem like that's where this is heading. If science can't capture consciousness through reduction, maybe that shows that consciousness isn't physical at all, and that it's some other kind of substance entirely. But Nagel is explicit that this isn't the conclusion to draw. He writes, "What morals should be drawn from these reflections, and what should be done next? It would be a mistake to conclude that physicalism must be false. It would be truer to say that physicalism is a position we cannot understand because we do not at present have any conception of how it might be true." What Nagel is saying is that the failure of reduction doesn't prove that physicalism is false. All this shows is that our current attempts to reduce the mind rely on a framework, namely science, that is by definition ill-equipped in explaining consciousness. So this also rules out the interpretation of the argument that says that maybe we just don't have enough scientific information yet, like an unsolved problem in physics that, if given enough time, will be cracked. It rules it out because it's science as a whole, as a framework in of itself, that fails in explaining consciousness. Though hard to see quite how, this doesn't mean we won't in the distant intellectual future develop a novel framework capable of explaining consciousness. As Nagel calls it, an objective phenomenology. An objective framework, like science, capable of explaining conscious facts. But even Nagel calls this a speculative proposal. He doesn't even promise that this future exists at all. We see this when he says, "Perhaps a new theoretical form can be devised for the purpose, but such a solution, if it exists, lies in the distant intellectual future." Or, and it's worth pushing this further, maybe no framework at all can be devised for the purpose of explaining consciousness. Maybe it's a problem that, by its very nature, just can't be solved. Every framework we have for understanding anything involves stepping back and looking at something from the outside in. But there's no way to do the same thing for consciousness. We can't separate ourselves from it. There's no vantage point beyond consciousness for consciousness to be examined from. Nagel's paper serves to show how intractable the mind-body problem is. As the philosopher and psychologist William James once remarked, emotion, like that of physical neurons, became a feeling. No phrase that our lips can form is so devoid of apprehensible meaning. Thank you for watching.